Welcome to In the House. My name is Mark Shiver. Glad to have you watching, listening, and very, very excited today. Our guest is the representative in the North Carolina House for District 59, that is Guilford County. He is the House Majority Whip, Representative Jon Hardister. Welcome to In the House.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate you having me.
Good. I've been looking forward to our time together. Now, I wanted to start by acknowledging that a few years ago, I was doing some writing and you were not new, but sort of new. And you were always available to help me when I needed a comment or some insight for an article. And so I wanted to just tell you I appreciate that. And I've enjoyed our relationship over the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, likewise. It's been good to work with you as well. I think I was in my second term when we first met. You were writing back then, and it's always been good to work with you.
Good. Well, I appreciate it. And let's dive right in. Since you've been there now, I think you're in your fifth term. And back when you came as someone new, the whole thing was new. The Republicans were in the majority for the first time in Lord knows how long, a century or whatever. And you were excited, you came to Raleigh and you're confronted with this huge mess. And it's like, oh boy, we don't even get to enjoy being in the majority. We've got to fix this horrible situation that was left for us by the previous majority, of course, the Democratic Party, 300 million or in shortfall in revenue. And on and on and on. And was that discouraging? Or did you just roll up your sleeves and say, we're going to get to work?
Yeah, I mean, so there wasn't much of a honeymoon period, honestly, for us. The state was in pretty bad shape 10 years ago. And, we didn't have a lot of time to sit around and enjoy being in the majority. And certainly that's not why we ran for office in the first place. We wanted to turn the state around economically. And, having a small business background, I had a front row seat to the Great Recession and, how difficult that was for us and so many families and businesses across the state. And the state of North Carolina was in really bad shape, quite frankly. There was a budget shortfall. We had very little in our state savings, and teacher pay had been cut and frozen, and employees' salaries, state employees had been, cut and frozen. Mm-hmm. So it was a tough time, and we had to roll up our sleeves and get to work. And it's been successful. The state's doing very well now, and I think the tax reform that we put into place, the responsible budgetary approach that we brought to the state, building up our savings and protecting our credit rating, cutting taxes, reforming the tax code, and then investing strategically in the core services government. It's been successful.
Well, let's roll the tape forward a decade later. Moody's, very well-respected financial agency, says North Carolina is way ahead of the rest of the nation economically. CNBC, another well-respected financial media outlet, calls North Carolina the best state in the country for business. Business Facilities Magazine, North Carolina has the best business climate in the country. What in the world? In 10 years, this big mess to the state is highly respected from an economic standpoint. I have to say, well done. But what do you think really is the key to how we've gotten to such a place of being recognized by all these well-respected financial agencies?
Yeah, so the recipe's not that complicated. And this is an example of where we got elected and did practically what we said we would do. And as I said before, we cut taxes, reformed the tax code. We also reduced a variety of regulations on the private sector. We invested strategically in the core services of government, and that includes K-12 education, higher education, workforce development. All these companies are coming to North Carolina. They're looking at things like what's the cost of living? Our cost of living is relatively low compared to a lot of other states. When you look at a state like California, New Jersey, Illinois, they have high cost of living, high taxes. It's hard to do business there.
Yeah.
But look at North Carolina as a place where, we can afford to live, we can afford to start a business. And then they look at your workforce, what type of education system do you have in place? And ours is a very strong education system. They also look at transportation, all the roads and bridges we have across the state, railroads, the port in Wilmington, all these things that we've done to create that infrastructure has been very successful. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better in many other states. And I was reading today about how Toyota, when they announced their major facility right outside of Guilford County that I represent, and also Boom Supersonic, Apple, all these VinFast, so many companies in the last year have made these announcements are coming to North Carolina, and they're talking about all those things that I just mentioned, looking at the taxes and the cost of living. Is a state in good financial condition? Do you have the workforce? So we check all those boxes.
Yeah, that's awesome. People don't realize the economic impact of our port. They're doing a really good job down there. And you've mentioned education and higher education, and you are the chairman of the House Higher Education Committee, Universities Committee, and that's something that has been real positive in the past few years. Tell us about that.
Yes, I've really enjoyed this position, and basically we oversee the higher education system in North Carolina, more specifically the universities. There's 16 constituent institutions within the UNC system. And what I'm excited about is that we've kept tuition down. There's not been an increase in tuition in 6 years. We've also capped fees. Student fees can't go up more than 3% per year.
Wow.
We've also implemented a programs called NC Promise, and that sets a tuition rate of $500 a semester. And there's 4 schools participating in that. And so that's really expanded, access to higher education. Another thing is the need-based scholarship, and these are for first generation, lower income students. And we put close to $100 million into that annually.
Wow.
For these lower income students to have access to higher education. So not only that, we're trying to shift the paradigm to more towards job specific education, academics, what's going to result in the student getting a job. I mean, there's still personal enrichment academics, but we're also trying to partner as much as we can in the private sector to be innovative and to make sure that we have education programs that result in a career path for the student.
So let's talk about the future. And I think that we've got, as you said, major companies, Boom Supersonic, VinFast, Toyota, et cetera, Apple, and we've got 16 schools here. How hard is it to sit down with faculty, or maybe not faculty, but administration, and say, okay, you guys have been primarily a liberal arts school for the last 80 years, but you're going to need to add some, different curriculum in order to graduate kids that can work at VinFast, that can work at Boom.
Yeah, so I have to give a shout out to the UNC system office and President Hans. I think that's exactly how he's looking at it. That's the leadership that he brings to the table, working with all the chancellors, university leadership across the system, and the board of governors too. They have a difficult job. They have a major enterprise to oversee, and that's the approach they're bringing to it, and us too in the General Assembly. So you put all that together, and the ship is being steered in the right direction. Another thing too, Mark, that I want to mention that I'm excited about, it's not part of the UNC system. The community college system is doing an extremely good job providing career and technical education. I mean, these are jobs that are very important, that pay well. I mean, we're talking CDL truck drivers, HVAC technicians, electrical, plumbing, welding. And we also have an apprenticeship program where students can go to work for 2 years and receive a degree with no debt and get a job. I mean, it's exciting to see it.
Wow. Yeah. Tip of the hat to the community college system here. in North Carolina. Now, I don't want to ask a negative question, but it just came to my mind. As the pipeline of potential economic development grows with the accolades that our state has received, and all of a sudden, hypothetically, another company comes and, they're promising, I don't know, 6,000 jobs. And then another one comes and they're promising, another 3,000 jobs. Do you worry, as the chairman of the Higher Education Universities Committee, do we have enough capacity to educate as the economic development is so strong?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's an opportunity to excel. Certainly a challenge, but there's an old saying that every obstacle presents an opportunity to excel. And that's how I see that. I mean, if you partner with the private sector, they're going to tell you what they want, what they need.
Right.
What type of skills they need for manufacturing, for business. They'll tell you, and we can work with them directly. We just have to be adaptive, and we have to keep progressing forward. As far as job training is concerned, if you want to compete globally, because North Carolina is not just competing within the U.S., we're competing globally.
Sure. Yeah.
That's how you have to look at it.
Well, I think the future is bright, obviously, and I'm glad that we're sitting in a situation where, a company like an agency like Moody's is saying we're way ahead of the nation, as opposed to saying, we're bringing up the rear. So are you worried about inflation? Are you worried about recession?
Yeah, right now, that's the biggest challenge facing our country. And, when you have inflation that's at a 40-year high, when gas prices are as high as they are, energy prices, I mean, it's having a tremendous impact, a very negative impact on the average family and lower income families that live paycheck to paycheck. Unless you've had 10% pay increase or more over last year, which most people haven't, you're losing money. And so that is a real concern. It's got to be our number one priority. The good news for North Carolina is with our economy, with our finances, we're poised to weather a recession better than most other states. But the challenge is that when it comes to inflation and energy prices, those factors are primarily being driven by the federal government.
Yeah.
And so we need some changes there, in U.S. Congress, and hopefully we'll get those changes in the election this year.
Well, speaking of inflation, you guys just did your biennium short session, and you tweaked the budget that was passed in the long session. And there's an inflation fund that I heard about. Tell us about that. I've never heard about that before.
Yeah, so the issue that we have is that the state has contracts and obligations to fulfill, and we're trying to be responsible because the state has to incur higher costs as well. It's not just the private sector. I mean, you think about a builder that's, say, building apartments, and the cost of supplies and labor is way up. So that builder is going to incur those higher costs. Well, the same is true for the state. And, it's true for average families. You're buying groceries, you're putting fuel in the vehicle, all those things, you're paying more. Yeah, you have to budget for it. And the state has to do the same thing, because whether we're building a new school or whatever it may be, roads and bridges, I mean, there's an inflationary factor that we have to consider.
Well, that's pretty smart that you would recognize that and set that money aside. And it's also, again, not to be repetitive and not to be patting you on the back or patting the majority party on the back, but I mean, to be in this position is a good thing. Not that we're immune from the effects of inflation or recession, but to recognize that's a good job. I mean, that's good.
It is. Yeah, it really is. And we're trying to talk about it and tell that story as much as we can, because I think it's very exciting that we've been able to get the state on a positive track, a positive trajectory economically. And, it's tangible. The story just kind of tells itself with all the businesses coming here, people moving here. So we have to continue to tell that story. Now,
I see you're pretty active on social media. And I see often where you have met with a local group a maybe a builders group, maybe an education group, maybe another type of citizens group. How do you divide your attention as a member of the House who has a lot of responsibility? I mean, not only are you chairing the Higher Education Committee, but you're the House Majority Whip. That certainly, when you're in session, has to take a lot of your time. And so how do you make time to stay engaged with the folks in your district while you're, worrying about recession funds and, education budgets and all the other things that you have to concern yourself with?
Yeah, it's time management, but also as a legislator, your number one priority has to be your constituents. You have to be accessible. You have to listen. You have to show up. That's what your constituents expect. So it's really important to do that from a public service standpoint, but also you can learn. Like that's how you learn what's going on in the schools, in the private sector, in the community. You have to be available and you have to be out there. And, honestly, it's just managing your calendar, not double booking on a day. And, I like to keep an active calendar, but you also have to pace yourself. And the advice I would give is to, definitely carve out a little bit of time for yourself, for your family, because that's always critical to do that. But, it's an honor to serve. And I enjoy being not only in office, but just having the opportunity to meet with constituents one-on-one, to talk to them, to find out what their concerns are, what their ideas are. And so going to Raleigh is one thing, and we do spend a good amount of time there at the state capitol, but us legislators, we stay busy back at home as well.
I don't remember what it was, and you might not remember, but I think maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there was some legislation that you drafted that came right out of a meeting with one of your constituents. And so I don't recall what that was. I wish I did. But, that right there says, hey, Representative Hardister is listening and paying attention to what is important to his constituents.
Yeah, there's actually been quite a bit of that. I could point to several examples of where that's happened. I mean, we're supposed to be a citizen legislature where we're connected to the people, which kind of illustrates the point that I think you're better off in a system where the federal government is more limited and defers more responsibility to the states. Because if you think about it, if you're a citizen, you're much closer to your state legislature than you are to the U.S. Congress. So yeah, I think it kind of illustrates the point. The federal government's grown beyond its, I think its intended scope, and practically it's not great for the country, because if you have a federal issue, it's fairly difficult to effectuate any changes. But, at the state level, we're a lot closer to our constituents. We're available to listen, to learn. And, I think it's important to bring that accessibility to public service.
Were you able to bring any infrastructure help to your district with the budget?
Yeah. So, when we have a budget surplus, we typically set aside an amount of funding that can be used for discretionary purposes. We're very judicious about this because we have a $27+ billion state budget. Yeah, a lot of money, but we also have to set aside, savings for the state, protect our credit rating. You also want to have reserves, so if there's a natural disaster or economic downturn, you have those reserves to get by. But we do set aside funding for what we call member request. And I was able to retain in the budget certain requests for Guilford County. And I'll just mention a few of those. The Hayes-Taylor YMCA is receiving $500,000 to expand their child care facility. Wow. We have a $100,000 grant in the budget that goes to the North Carolina Folk Festival. Mm-hmm. That happens once a year in September, but it brings people from all over the United States. Some come from outside the country to attend the festival. It's live music, and that funding will help them with their marketing and logistics. Also, the furniture market in Guilford County's major operation happens twice a year. Yeah, brings people here from all over the world, actually, and we have some recurring dollars in there for that. And I could give you other examples, but the point is we try to allocate those member requests in such a way that it's going to have a positive impact. We're very judicious about it. We're not just handing dollars out. We want to make sure it's going to have a positive impact.
Yeah, and for example, the furniture market, you give them whatever, and that turns into massive economic impact with all the people that come, and they spend money on food, and they spend money on lodging, and they're buying furniture. So the multiplier effect from investing in something like that is huge. So it's money well spent.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly how we look at it. We want to make sure it's going to have that that type of impact. I'll give you another example, something I'm really excited about. People need to come to Greensboro and go to the Natural Science Center. It's a nonprofit organization. It's been around a long time, and they have a science center that has a lot of information on earth sciences, but also animal sciences as well. And they've expanded their facility. I remember going there as a child. It's an awesome place. It's really good for education. It's also good for tourism. People come from all over to see this place, and they're expanding their footprint, substantially. And they're raising private funds to do that. I think they get some local funding as well. But I was able in last year's budget to get $500,000 to go towards that expansion, which we think ties into, like I said, tourism, but also education.
As you're sitting here now in what is typically a longer break than you normally get, could you believe you were out by July 4th? I don't think that's ever happened before.
I'll be honest, not really. The terms I've served is we're hard pressed to get out by July. So I was admittedly skeptical that it would happen. I kind of felt like we may or may not get the budget done, but there'd be other things going on, and then we'd have to come back. I thought maybe take a few days off of the 4th of July and then come back later. As it is, we've completed the budget. We had a bipartisan process, which is great. The governor signed it. It's great to see that. I think it's a great budget for the state. And, moving forward, we might be back in session sometime later over the summer, over the fall. We don't know right now. But yeah, to adjourn the short session when we did was certainly refreshing because, when I first ran for this position, they said this is a part-time job and it's really full-time. I'm glad to do it, but it's also good to, spend some time at home and, not have to be in Raleigh all the time. Yeah.
Part-time is a matter of perspective, I think. But let me ask you one final question as our time is getting away from us. As the House Majority Whip, I think people would be interested to know, and I'm just going to take an issue, not that I want you to talk about this issue, but something controversial, for example, like sports betting or Medicaid expansion or medical marijuana, where you've got opinions all over the place. As the Majority Whip, it's your responsibility to try to bring people together. Tell us what it's like when you've got a controversial issue like one of the three that I mentioned. And again, I'm not asking you about those issues, but something that's really, it's in the paper every day. And, how do you, with all that pressure on you to try to bring a consensus together, how do you go about that?
So really, it's just building relationships and problem solving. So when we have an issue that we're working on, like you cited sports betting, that was a close vote. It failed, unfortunately. We knew the votes were going to be close on that. I was a supporter of it, but we kind of knew that the Republican House caucus would be divided, and we weren't quite sure how the floor vote would go. But look, it's all part of the process, and it's important that we kind of know where the votes are. And sometimes if we don't think we have the votes in something, in fact, most of the time, if we don't have the votes, we're not going to bring a bill to the floor to be voted on. Right. As the whip, my job is certainly not to tell people how to vote. We want members to vote their conscience, vote their district and their constituents, not to be pressured into voting a certain way. But certainly we like to know what the vote count is. So if we're doing something like a veto override or voting on legislation that we believe is a high priority, we have to count the votes. And if the votes are not there, then sometimes you can make adjustments to the bill, to build some form of consensus. And pretty often what I found, if I'm counting the votes on a particular bill, and, let's just say there's 8 or 10 members in our caucus that are voting no, I can identify who they are, they can identify what issues they have, and there could be, a section of the bill they have a problem with or a particular detail that could get worked out, so we allow that to get worked out before the process, moves forward and the bill actually is voted on. So that's kind of what it is. And you just have to maintain contact with your colleagues and have good relationship skills. But I tell people, hey, look, whip sounds kind of intimidating. It's really, it's a classic term. The term whip has been around a long time. Really, we count votes, build consensus. Another thing we do too is attendance. If we have to know how many members are out, we the majority party certainly want to maintain the majority on the floor. We're in committee. So, as a result of that, I have to track attendance. If people are going to be out, they let me know. And so it's kind of like if a student goes to school and the teacher does attendance, I kind of do the same thing.
Yeah. How about that? Well, I guess the old days where they actually had a whip back in the original where the term came from, I guess you don't get to enjoy that. But
somebody gave me a whip as a joke. It sits in the corner of my office.
Nice. Well, Representative Hardister, I've enjoyed our time together. You're always candid, and I think you're one of the most effective legislators down there. House, Senate, doesn't matter. I think you've been very effective over the last 10 years. You've represented your district very well, and I know that you will continue to do so. So thank you very much for your time today and for being our guest on In the House.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.
All right.